Hi, and welcome to my office hours video. In today's video, I'm going to talk through some of the content that we very recently presented at the Society for the Teaching of Psychology annual conference on teaching in Portland, Oregon in October 2023. We're just really excited about this content. We may put some of the talk or all of the talk out on a podcast episode in the future. We're working on a paper that has a little bit of a different spin on the content, but is very similar to the talk, and we're excited about that. But we wanted to get this information out to our Patreon supporters first, in part because we think that many of you are people who communicate about the science of learning. And so we wanted to share this information with you and sort of give you some ideas and maybe spark some conversations about this. So the idea behind our talk was to say basically that we know that the science of learning has a really strong base of evidence. There's a lot of research coming out of science of learning, and that research in relation to retrieval practice has been going on for over 100 years, 120 years or so. And so we have pretty good evidence to suggest that this thing is effective. But what it seems like we as a field are less good at is figuring out the best ways to communicate about the science of learning in a way that leads to greater levels of implementation, greater adoption of the strategies. And in the past, it seems to us at least that the method has been to engage in research and to publish that research and to give talks and sort of allow word of mouth, but mostly to focus on publishing these peer-reviewed papers. And while peer-reviewed papers are important and that peer review process is essential for the science to move forward, we are finding that it just does not seem to be the best way to engage in science communication in a way that leads to greater implementation just in society as a whole. And so the purpose of our talk and this paper is to talk about anecdotally our own experiences in engaging in other types of science communication, mostly workshops with educators, and to highlight some of the things that we have noticed. The idea being that we can address some of these things from the literature, and also that we need more research in this area, which is what that paper is about. And so we talked about sort of three issues that seem to come up, three themes when we talk with educators about implementing retrieval practice into the classroom and the way we have tried to address those issues. And so we call them roadblocks, but we're trying to turn those roadblocks into speed bumps. So opportunities to sort of slow down, discuss the nuances of the literature, and talk through the evidence base that can help address these three concerns. So the three things that we have noticed come up, at least it seems to be, come up most often when we talk with educators about retrieval practice is: one, a time issue; two, an issue related to sort of learning basic knowledge and application; and three, test anxiety. So I'll take each of these in turn. The first, this issue of time, is essentially that what retrieval practice takes too much time. And it's not that retrieval practice itself takes a ton of time, but that there is no time. And because there's not enough time, adding anything, even something small, feels like it's just impossible. And it feels like it's just adding another thing. And so the way we've tried to address this using the literature, using the science of learning, is to talk about the ways that retrieval practice can be infused into activities that are already going on within the classroom. So rather than talking about adding something, adding additional activities, we like to point out that there's a lot of evidence supporting retrieval practices being effective in a lot of different types of activities. And so things that are already going on in the classroom can take a very small little adjustment to turn it into retrieval practice so that it's not adding more classroom time. So one example is that educators talk to us about using exit tickets. So for students that are engaging in smaller courses and then switching their classroom. So like high school, college level. For those, when you leave the classroom, an exit ticket might involve writing the most important thing down from the lesson, or writing a question that they might have, or writing something and turning that in. And at least at the university level, a lot of times these are used as more attendance markers to make sure that everybody is staying to the end of class. They get credit for this thing. But and for younger kids, it can involve just sort of a transition to the next activity. We've said that if you turn that into a retrieval activity, so put all of your materials away and write from memory the most important thing from today's lesson, or the most important thing from the lesson the last time you were there a couple of days ago, or even last week, or make some connection between those two things, that can turn an activity that is already going on in the classroom into one that is retrieval based. So that's one way of doing it. You could also flip it and make it an entrance ticket, and it has the same purpose of sort of taking attendance and making sure students are there and engaged, but making them think of the most important thing from the last class, whether that was a couple of days ago or even yesterday. And now we're engaging in spaced retrieval practice. So again, the idea is infusing retrieval into activities that are already happening. And we can support this with the literature showing that retrieval practice improves learning and memory when it's used in a lot of different activities. We don't just have to keep adding more and more tests. Also, the issue with time, we tend to then worry about, well, now that students are producing these responses, do I have to grade them? And the answer is no, they don't have to be graded. You could do peer feedback or peer grading within the classroom. Of course, that's going to take some classroom time, but there is some research supporting the effectiveness of those activities. But also they can just be a no stakes or a very low stakes, just sort of check you did it kind of activity. The important thing is that the students are bringing the information to mind. So that's the way that we have tried to engage with educators and sort of address that concern, turning it from a roadblock into a speed bump, and importantly, using the literature to do that. Thing number 2 was this idea of basic knowledge. Sometimes the concern is that retrieval practice promotes rote memorization or just sort of learning of basic facts. And what we are really interested in is engaging in things that will help the students take their knowledge and apply it in new situations. We're interested in more meaningful learning, sort of higher order learning. And the way we've addressed this is sort of twofold. One is that we point to the importance of learning basic knowledge. So there's a lot of literature showing that background knowledge or basic knowledge is important in order to build on the next thing. And so we need to have a way to strengthen our understanding of the basic knowledge in order to then be able to engage in higher order, more meaningful learning. We can't integrate the more complex stuff if we don't have the base foundation first. That's thing number 1. The other way we've tried to address this is by showing the volume of literature suggesting that retrieval practice does help students engage in more application. So the more practice you have at applying and transferring information into new scenarios, the more likely you're going to be able to do that later. And so when designing retrieval activities, asking students to engage in that type of application and transfer within the activity itself can really help with this. I used in the last in the first roadblock to speed bump an example of an exit ticket. And one thing that an educator might do is ask students to take something they learned in a previous class and something they learned today and put it together, or to come up with an example of a way something from today's lesson applies to themselves, or to take 2 ideas and maybe as part of that ticket, you give them 2 concepts and they have to explain all of the ways the 2 things are similar and as many of the ways as they can that they are different. And engaging in that more meaningful higher order level thinking during retrieval practice can help promote that type of learning and memory later. Thing number 3 is student test anxiety. We hear a lot of concerns about increasing anxiety. Students are already really anxious, especially post-pandemic, and there's literature suggesting that that's the case. There's also literature suggesting that test anxiety in particular is really common. And so educators are concerned about adding more retrieval into the day, and that might lead to more anxiety, and more anxiety might cause more harm than good. And there's some good news here. When we have very low stakes or even no stakes retrieval opportunities, that practice engaging in retrieval in sort of a safe space, in a situation where the correctness of their retrieval doesn't make or break them, that can actually alleviate some test anxiety. So by engaging in very low stakes or no stakes retrieval practice, they get practice engaging in retrieval in a way that it doesn't feel like so much pressure. And that can make it such that when they take those bigger assessments later on, they have less anxiety. And so retrieval practice can actually be part of the solution instead of contributing to the problem. It also, when you give low stakes and no stakes retrieval, it doesn't tend to produce a lot of student test anxiety in itself because the stakes are very low or non-existent. So an entrance or an exit ticket could really more be about them practicing with their responses and just checking, did they do it? Did they not do it? That helps with grading time. It also helps show the students that this is not a high stakes activity. It's just an opportunity for them to practice. You can also use online like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms that are anonymous, so don't collect their names. And that shows very clearly to the students that it is just practice and to get a sense of how the class is doing as a whole. You can't give them grades or assign any sort of stake to the retrieval if you don't collect their names with their responses. And so there's a lot of ways of engaging students in retrieval that is low or no stakes that can be used to help reduce the test anxiety of the activity itself and also to alleviate test anxiety as a whole. So these are the three things, again, that we have identified sort of informally, anecdotally, as concerns that a lot of educators have. And we hope by talking through the ways that the literature can address these concerns, we can help educators feel more comfortable and confident infusing retrieval practice into their classroom. And we also hope that we can make individuals or help foster individuals' confidence in communicating about retrieval practice. So when we talk with educators, this is a way that we can, these are ways, I should say, that we can sort of address these concerns head on. And part of the purpose of our paper really is to say, we don't really have a lot of research or any research on the best ways to communicate about the science of learning, to inform implementation and to improve implementation. And so we see these three sort of speed roadblocks and turning them into speed bumps as a good starting place, but we need to test these ideas empirically as a field and try to identify the best ways to communicate about these things so that the science of learning gets out there more than it has been in the past.